At exactly 02:45 a.m. Moscow time, just days after Russian commanders celebrated a crippling offensive against Ukraine's power grid, a priority report landed on a desk deep within the Ministry of Defense. It wasn't a summary or an after-action review. It was a live intelligence feed showing how the Belgorod 3 substation, a 200 million node anchoring their supposedly invincible border grid, was being systematically dismantled by a swarm of drones that combined cost less than a new Toyota Camry.
This attack was a tactical impossibility. Moscow had spent the better part of a decade and billions of rubles transforming its western border into a layered, high-tech fortress of integrated air defenses. It was a digital iron curtain designed to detect and destroy anything from a NATO cruise missile to a commercial Cessna. The problem for Russia? Ukraine had just picked the lock with a paperclip. But here's the mystery that had Russian generals screaming into secure phones that morning. The FPV drones used in the strike, identified from wreckage as Shrike variants, have a maximum operational flight range of about 10 miles. The substation they had just obliterated sits 186 miles inside Russian territory, protected by concentric rings of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. So how did a swarm of what are essentially short-range hobbyist drones materialize deep inside one of the planet's most heavily defended airspaces? The answer is a masterclass in deception, a battlefield sleight of hand that would give the Kremlin a very, very rude awakening.
At 02:30 a.m., just 15 minutes before the strike, three ordinary-looking KAMAZ 6350 logging trucks pulled over at separate pre-planned coordinates. Each stop was mathematically calculated to be just inside the drone's 10-mile strike radius from the substation. To any passing patrol, they were a perfect, boring disguise for a region where the timber industry is a constant hum of activity. Each truck was piled high with 3 tons of genuine pine logs and registered with local Belgorod plates. Except they weren't logging trucks. Each vehicle was a self-contained mobile launch platform, the military equivalent of a mobile Amazon fulfillment center, designed for one very specific last-mile delivery. Beneath the canvas tarps, the vehicles were wrapped in a specialized multi-layer thermal blanket. This wasn't just insulation, it was a passive camouflage system using metallized polyethylene and aerogel composites to mask the vehicle's heat signature, rendering it a cold, unremarkable blob to any passing Russian thermal optics. The mission's flight plan wasn't left to chance. For the 48 hours prior, a Ukrainian-developed AI system named Perun had run thousands of simulations. Think of it like a professional esports team studying heat maps and player movements on a game level before a world championship. Perun analyzed terabytes of Maxar satellite imagery, cross-referenced it with meteorological data to account for 15-mile-per-hour crosswinds, and plotted an ingress route at exactly 50 feet off the ground. This altitude was critical, low enough to hug the Earth's curvature and remain completely invisible to the Nebo-M radar's Doppler filters, which are designed to ignore slow, low-altitude clutter like birds or ground vehicles. Inside the trucks, there were no pilots. At 02:31 a.m., a single encrypted command packet arrived via a concealed Starlink terminal. A low hiss of hydraulics broke the silence as a section of each container's roof slid open. One by one, 18 Shrike drones lifted off into the freezing fog, their electric motors barely a whisper against the wind. Back at the S-400 battery, the Russian operators, monitoring screens showing nothing but routine atmospheric noise, saw absolutely nothing. For 6 minutes, the swarm was a ghost. Then, at 02:36 a.m., the illusion shattered. A single flicker on a screen at the Nebo-M primary radar station was flagged by its automated system as a Level 3 anomaly. The alert flashed to the command post of a nearby Panzer S-1 battery, where a bleary-eyed Russian operator saw what the machine was struggling to classify: 6 distinct radar contacts, flying too fast for birds, too low for aircraft, and in a formation far too perfect for any natural phenomenon. The Russian playbook for an unidentified border incursion is simple and brutal: tactical overkill. The response was immediate. A single button press launched 2 57E surface-to-air missiles, each one a streak of fire costing as much as a new Mercedes-Benz, accelerated to 3 times the speed of sound. They found their targets, resulting in 2 brilliant, silent explosions against the dark sky. A textbook interception. It was also a textbook trap.
They had just wasted over $20,000 vaporizing two worthless $300 decoy drones, each one little more than a cheap frame with a simple radar reflector. Worse, this apparent victory triggered a disastrous chain reaction. Believing the primary threat was neutralized, Ground Command dispatched two Ural 4320 trucks with infantry squads to hunt for phantom Ukrainian commandos they assumed had launched the drones. And while Russian ground forces chased shadows in the snow, the real killers, the 16 remaining Shrikes, slipped past in the chaos, utterly invisible. The Russian celebration lasted exactly 2 minutes. At 02:38 a.m., just as the Panzer crew was reporting 2 confirmed kills, the real attack began. A signal from a French-made Thales jamming system integrated into 4 of the Shrike drones hit the Panzer's acquisition radar with the force of a digital flashbang. On the screen inside the command vehicle, the world dissolved into a blizzard of white static. The operators were completely blind. While they were blind, the drones danced. The main swarm executed a perfect beam maneuver, turning 90 degrees to fly perpendicular to the radar's last known position. This tactic minimizes a drone's radar cross-section, making it appear as a fleeting, insignificant return. Simultaneously, their guidance signal began frequency hopping, jumping across 100 different channels every second. Trying to lock onto it would be like trying to catch a ghost that changes its form with every blink. But the worst was yet to come. The problem wasn't just in the airwaves, it was in the air itself. The brutal 28-degree Fahrenheit temperature was waging a war on their hardware. The lithium-ion batteries powering the Panzer's turret and fire control system, not designed for the punishing Russian winter, were freezing. Power output plummeted by 25%. The turret, which needed to traverse at 90 degrees per second to target targets, suddenly felt sluggish, as if it were moving through molasses. The Russian operators were now fighting a two-front war. They were electronically blind, and their multi-million-dollar weapon was freezing to death around them. On the ground, the Russians were blind, deaf, and rapidly freezing. But Russia's military machine has many eyes, and one of them was staring down from 30,000 feet. An A-50 AWAC, a flying command post whose radar can spot a fighter jet 250 miles away, had been patrolling its standard orbit. Its mission wasn't to look for tiny drones. Its powerful Schmel-M look-down radar was designed to track entire squadrons of NATO fighters, but it had another, more fundamental sensor. It was hunting for heat against the uniform sub-zero cold of the vast Russian landscape. 3 tiny anomalies glowed white-hot on the AWACS's thermal display. They weren't the drones, they were the trucks. The diesel engines, still radiating a searing 160 degrees Fahrenheit from their recent journey, stood out against the frozen earth like 3 burning embers on a sheet of white paper. The thermal blankets were hiding the trucks from ground patrols, but they couldn't hide them from an eye in the stratosphere. The data flashed from the A-50 to a regional command center, where a furious Russian commander finally saw his chance to reverse the night's humiliation. He wasn't just going to destroy the source, he was going to capture it. The order crackled over the encrypted network, dripping with vengeful certainty. Capture them alive! I want proof! The response was terrifying. 2 Ka-52 attack helicopters lifted off from a nearby airbase, their coaxial rotors beating the cold air into submission. These weren't transports, they were apex predators. Their arbalete millimeter-wave radar began slicing through the fog, painting the terrain below in a ghostly thermal image. Behind them, a lumbering Mi-8 transport followed, carrying a fire team of 6 Spetsnaz soldiers and 2 Caucasian Shepherd attack dogs. The hunters were loose. Inside one of the logging trucks, the 2 Ukrainian operators saw the mission clock ticking down. The drones had just 3 minutes of battery life left. Then they heard it. A faint, rhythmic whump, whump, whump in the distance. A quick glance at their own tablet, networked to passive acoustic sensors, confirmed their worst fear. Helicopters, 2 of them, and they were heading directly for their position. Panic flared. The driver slammed the truck into gear, but the wheels just spun, whining uselessly. During the hasty setup, they had backed into a 2-foot-deep snowdrift. They were stuck, trapped in a metal box with the sound of approaching death getting louder every second. The Russians thought they had them cornered, a bear trapping a fox in its den. It was a classic mistake. They had just walked right into the second and far deadlier part of the trap. The moment the helicopters appeared on their sensors, the Ukrainian operators executed the next phase. This entire scenario, being discovered, being hunted, was not a failure of their plan. It was the final, crucial step. A single command was sent from their console, not to their own truck's engine, but to the third logging truck positioned 1.5 miles away. Instantly, the decoy truck roared to life. The Russian K-52 pilots, peering through their thermal sights, saw exactly what they expected, a hot, fleeing target. They banked hard, locking on and giving chase. But the heat signature they were chasing wasn't a 160-degree diesel engine. It was a cheap 12-volt heater wired to a car battery and a small RF emitter, designed to mimic one perfectly. It was a brilliant piece of misdirection, the corporate equivalent of a phishing email that tricks a company's entire security team while the real hackers are walking out the front door with the server. The moment the helicopters were diverted, the back door of the real command truck swung open. The two operators plunged into the waist-deep snow, sprinting 150 yards to a position they knew by heart. Waiting for them was an old UAZ Hunter. It had been parked there overnight, its engine block as cold as the surrounding landscape. To the thermal-gazing helicopters, it was completely invisible. In a fluid 30-second drill, they threw their control console and its precious hard drives into the back. The engine coughed once and roared to life. But this wasn't just an escape. As the UAZ sped away down a hidden logging trail, the operator in the passenger seat continued the mission. The back of the UAZ had been converted into a mobile command station. The rear hatch popped open, and the final wave of drones, tethered to the console by a 5-mile-long spool of hair-thin fiber optic cable, launched into the night from the moving vehicle. They were now a ghost, controlling a swarm of smaller ghosts while escaping at 50 miles per hour. Minutes later, 6 heavily armed Spetsnaz soldiers rappelled from their Mi-8, storming the decoy logging truck. They kicked down the doors, ready to capture the high-value targets who had humiliated their air defense. Instead, they found a cheap 12-volt heater, a GPS spoofer, and a single USB stick plugged into a small speaker, blaring a remix of a Ukrainian folk song on a loop. The Russians had captured a toaster oven, and miles away, speeding down a hidden border trail, the real operators were about to deliver the final killing blow. 02:45 a.m. Moscow time. The lead drone, now just feet from its target, made its final adjustment. Its INS GPS navigation system locked onto the geometric center of Transformer Number 2, the very heart of the substation. It wasn't just hitting the building, it was performing open-heart surgery with a 1-pound fragmentation warhead. The impact was silent for a fraction of a second. The drone's M732 fuse was intentionally set with a 0.8-second delay, allowing the warhead to punch inside the transformer's housing before detonating. It was the difference between knocking on a door and kicking it down from the inside. What happened next was a brutal physics lesson. The blast wave, with an explosive force equivalent to about 2 pounds of TNT, was trapped within the substation's concrete walls. The cold, dense 28-degree air acted as a natural supercharger, amplifying the blast pressure to nearly double its normal force. It's the same principle that makes a turbocharger work in a high-performance engine, only this engine was designed for destruction. The super-pressurized wave hit the building's internal support columns not as a push, but as a shattering blow. They disintegrated. Less than a second later, the massive steel truss roof, having lost all support, folded inward, collapsing on top of the delicate control systems and turbines below. Miles away, the Spetsnaz team leader made the most humiliating radio call of his career. Their high-value asset acquisition had netted them a cheap space heater. And thousands of miles above, an American intelligence satellite, making its scheduled pass, captured the entire sequence in 12 high-resolution frames. The first frame showed 3 intact trucks. The middle frame showed the helicopters chasing a decoy. The final frame showed an 80-foot crater where the substation used to be, and the faint thermal track of a single UAZ disappearing over the border. This paranoia bled into the entire regional supply chain. Suddenly, every logging truck was a potential Trojan horse. A critical supply train carrying new upgrade kits for the Pantsir system was stopped dead. its cargo searched piece by piece for days. Ukraine hadn't just destroyed a building, they had executed a perfect supply chain attack, choking the entire military apparatus. So let's look at the final math. With 18 drones worth a total of $45,000, Ukraine turned a $200 million substation into a smoldering wreck and inflicted cascading blackouts on 20,000 households and tens of millions in repair costs. It was a strategic return on investment that would make the world's best venture capitalists weep with envy. The lesson learned that frozen morning was brutal and clear. In modern warfare, the winner isn't the side with the biggest weapon. It's the side clever enough to turn a logging truck into a launch platform, a cheap heater into a perfect decoy, and a GoPro into a weapon of mass disruption. It's the side that can wake a dictator up from his dream of a grand empire. If you were the commander of that drone team, how would you have danced in the snow on the Russian border? Let me know your strategy in the comments. Like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next breakdown. Bye for now.